One morning, this is just encapsulating the whole journey. One morning when I was 18, almost 19, I woke up to go to uni and I cracked open a can of beer and I downed it. And I went to uni and I thought, what the bloody hell am I doing? Why did I do that this morning? Welcome to MAMWAA. I'm Gordy, your host, and this is the podcast that includes you into my most famous song lyrics.
He's a middle-aged man with an attitude, and he didn't even have one till he met you.
That's right, I'm the middle-aged man, and my attitude will chatter us through all things that I'm passionate about, from spirituality, the gym and fitness, food, travelling, and music or movies. Quick disclaimer, this list is not exhaustive. So you can get on or you can get off and join us for the episodes that you like the sounds of. Dip in or dip out, as long as you keep dipping. Either way, we've got something to say and we're going in 3, 2, 1 after another. Where does it stop? Whether it's drink, smoking, pills, addiction is literally killing us. Welcome to MAMWAA. Today we take a deep dive into the complexities of a widespread issue that affects millions of lives. Addiction. I am your host, Gordy, and today we will be exploring the various facets, let's say, of addiction, from the roots of it, the forms of it, the impact on it has with us as individuals and as a society. We're going to have a look at unraveling the layers of addiction. We will look at discussing the ways to understand it, support people who are going through it, or support ourselves, and overcoming it so that we can get past our difficulties. So how do we define addiction firstly? Addiction it's a very complex and multifaceted phenomenon, we'll call it today, and it transcends just substance abuse. It goes past all of that. It encompasses a range of behaviours, including drugs, alcohol, whether that's alcohol dependency or the addiction itself, gambling, gaming, even technology addiction, things like phones. At the core, addiction actually involves a whole compulsive need that we need to engage in a particular activity or consume a particular substance, regardless of what the consequences, as harmful as they are, it has on us. So psychologically, addiction, it's often fueled by underlying issues like trauma, mental health disorders, maybe a deep sense of emptiness that we might have. It's the brain's reward system that plays a critical role in our addiction. Substances and behaviours trigger a release of something called dopamine, and that creates a cycle inside us of craving it, reinforcing it, that's what we need. So the types of addiction that we may be looking at today, they will manifest in us in various forms. Each of them has a unique challenge or a unique consequence, depending on what it is. Substance addiction, like drugs and alcohol, is probably the most widely recognized type. It's got devastating effects on your physical health, our physical health, relationships, overall well-being. And then you've got things like behavioural addictions, like gambling, gaming addiction, and they often go unnoticed by people because, like, they're happening, like, right in front of us, but they are equally destructive. There is a rise of technology addiction, and that's characterised by excessive screen time on our phones, social media use, and this actually poses quite new challenges in our digital age. This affects our mental health and our interpersonal relationships, friends, family, things like that. So how do we understand the different types of addiction? Because it's crucial to address the root causes and provide tailored interventions that we need to support us on our recovery journey. You might notice that I said our recovery journey. So my own experience of addiction, actually, and I'm going to get quite personal in today's session, because over the years, from a very young age, I've had addictions for alcohol. I really struggled to get away from smoking marijuana, smoking cigarettes, and at one point I kind of regularly started taking narcotics on, let's call it shelf drugs like paracetamols, painkillers, stuff like that. It's a really difficult one for me to kind of sectionalize, if that's a word, because it happens so casually and so regularly. Like starting smoking when you're 15, you're hanging around with your friends, you think it's cool. Being at uni and drinking all the time, and then it creeps up. Like, as somebody with an addictive personality, I didn't even notice I was an addict, but it played such a large part in forming where my life went. So, I mean, I'll talk about alcohol very briefly. Like, when I was 18, I'd started going out drinking when I was 15, and I got my first full-time job at 15 and a half. And it was just a done thing. You go out every weekend, 2 nights a week, turn to 3 nights a week, 4 nights a week. Then I go to uni and I was out 5 or 6 nights a week. And then one morning, this is just encapsulating the whole journey. One morning when I was 18, almost 19, I woke up to go to uni and I cracked open a can of beer and I downed it. And I went to uni and I thought, what the bloody hell am I doing? Why did I do that this morning? And coming from a household with an alcoholic parent, which I might get into later on, I really took myself aback and I was like, I need to cap this. So I stopped. I just completely stopped going out with my friends. But that kind of crept up in many years later, which I will probably touch on further on in today's episode. Smoking, like I was saying, I started smoking at 15 and a half with all my friends, and I thought, yeah, let's be cool, blah, blah, blah. And it took me like 12, 13 attempts at the age of 30 or 20, 25 at one point to stop. And then one of my partners didn't want me smoking, so I tried to stop for my partner, and then I ended up smoking for a year behind everyone's back, like hiding behind buildings, trying to make sure nobody ever saw me smoking. And that was an internal wake-up call for me, but having done it for a whole year, it became so normal, hiding this addiction that I had. So yeah, it's that whole, won't get into the whole pain medication thing just now. There's just too much. I don't want to get too depressed about everything in today's episode, but it happens. And I guess the point I'm making here is, because it creeps up on us, we are never fully aware of what it's doing to us or the people around us. So what is the impact of these addictions? Well, it goes far beyond individuals like myself struggling with the condition. If you're going through it, your families, your friends, your communities can also be so deeply affected by it, and they might face emotional, financial, or social challenges as they are trying to help you navigate the complexities of whatever your addiction actually is. So when we look at talking about hiding behind buildings, things like your employment, your productivity might be suffering. And as an individual, your financial situation becomes unstable, your relationships become strained, like I've experienced. Children who are grown up in your households are affected by addiction, and they become quite particularly vulnerable, facing like a lot of childhood experiences that have really intricate, long-lasting effects on their development and their well-being. So when we're addressing that societal impact of addiction, it needs a really varied approach, and that's things like prevention, education on it, maybe access to quality treatment or support services. And then it's really important that we're supporting ourselves, like I mentioned at the start, and other people around us to overcome that addiction. The recovery itself can be challenging, but it is achievable. I mean, I'm proof of that. The journey requires so much commitment, support, resilience, and it's really important that we're seeking professional help through things like therapy, counselling, support groups, or a support network. And that's usually the first step towards getting recovery or going through recovery. Provide yourself or somebody you know with the tools and the strategies to address those underlying issues. And that can really help to develop healthier coping mechanisms. So the support network that I'm talking about, things like family, friends, peers, that also plays a really crucial role in sustaining recovery, let's say, navigating the ups and downs of the journey, incorporating self-care practices, such as things like, I do a lot of mindfulness, exercise, I work out 4 or 5 times a week. Those healthier lifestyle choices can really help us to rebuild both physical and emotional well-being. So overall, when we're talking about things like this, addiction is a really complex and intricate, like I mentioned, issue, and it affects so many people around the world. So it's important that we're understanding the roots of addiction, the forms of addiction, so that we can all work towards, firstly, destigmatizing it and providing the right support and the resources to those who need it. Now, we mentioned impact on children, and I just wanted to give you a rough kind of idea of what some kids go through in an alcoholic household. Now, our mom was an alcoholic, and as a later teenager, she sat down and explained to us the difficulties that she went through. But just like, I want to tell you a story, right? And there was one day, it wasn't Christmas or anything, it was just a normal weekend, and our mom was putting a dinner together. Obviously, she was drunk because she was an alcoholic. And she had a turkey in the oven. And she asked me to turn the turkey. And I was like, who turns a bloody turkey? I was only about 12 or 13 or something, I can't remember. But I wasn't out of school or anything, I was still in high school. So I was like, Mum, you don't turn a turkey? And she's like, you do turn a turkey? Like, broad Glaswegian. Get your rifts on that kitchen, turn that fucking turkey. I'm like, okay. So I went into the kitchen, right? Thought I was being smart as a teenager. Opened the oven so she could hear it. Shook the tray, closed the door and came back in. I didn't know if you turn turkeys or not. I was only bloody 12 or 13. So I came in, and within a split second, she stood up, went to that oven, and I knew she was checking it, and me and my sister found it hilarious. Within a split second, and this is where the addiction gets serious, I looked up and my mom was walking towards me through the living room door with the tray of the turkey, sizzling hot oil, and she threw it over, mind the mic, and she threw it over the coffee table towards me. It went all over the sofa. I jumped out of the way just in time. And I was just like, I found it hilarious as a kid. I was like, oh my God, me and my sister ran upstairs. And then we just stayed in our rooms for the rest of the night. But our mum chased us up the stairs, but tried to kick the door down because we wouldn't let her in the room. She was so angry. But years later, there's trauma behind all of that, you know? As a kid, you might think it's funny, or it's all very kind of, all these anxieties that are built up, and you don't know how to process all those emotions. As an alcoholic adult, caring for 2 young children, it's very interesting all these years later as an adult to know, or to think deeply about, why is no one aware of all these traumas behind closed doors? We know if someone's an alcoholic that they're meant to be raising 2 kids, and if they're drunk all the time. I'm not saying take all kids out of households and stuff, but there's a lot of questions as an adult I've had to really get under that. Now, this journey of alcoholism that my mum went through, she was a smoker until she was in her 30s. And I remember, like, she just stopped. She just decided not to smoke anymore, and she never did. That's something I couldn't do as an adult. I just could not stop smoking. I did eventually, twice, but we'll get to that. So yeah, it's like at one point she lost her kids. I decided at the age of 14 to move, or it wasn't 14, it was 12 I think, move in with my dad. And my sister was a bit older, so she had moved out and got her own place and stuff. And she stopped drinking. And she managed to not drink for 4 years. She went to college. She was working towards a qualification to be a secretary, and get a full-time job and all that kind of stuff. That she had her goals back. She had got life back. And unfortunately for our mom, one of her best friends died unexpectedly, and overnight, that alcoholism, that addiction, went straight back tenfold, and she was just never the same person since. Luckily enough, we were a bit older by then, and we were getting on with our own lives, but it still had its own problems when both of us had moved away into a different city and hundreds of miles away. We were still getting repercussions of that addiction over the phone, our workplaces. It was just, it was insane at times. But inevitably, it killed our mother. She could not pull it back again, unfortunately. And that's worst case scenario of addiction. Like, we can stop when we are strong enough, when we go through the right path, when we've got the right support. But it just takes, and I don't say this lightly to any of you listening, it just takes one bad trigger to kill us. That's literally the seriousness of this podcast. But like I said, I don't want to get too depressed about it. And I really hope for anyone who's listening or watching the video, you might see I'm not getting too upset about what I've just said. But I have spoke about it an awful lot over the years. I've had a lot of discussions with other people about things, and I've processed a lot more now. I'm 42, for God's sake. That's a lie. 43, turning 44. Please make me younger. But yeah, this is the real reality of addiction when we do talk about it and think about it. My smoking journey was quite intense as well. This was the addiction for me that was the worst, because I tried to stop smoking 12, 13 times, and I just could not do it. And every time I started smoking again, I went back with a vengeance. So I'd gone from smoking maybe 15 a day to 20 a day, 20 a day, 25 a day, 25 to 30, and it just kept increasing. And then by my 30s, I was on 40 cigarettes a day. This is how my addiction processes itself within me. And then in my 30s, I think it was, or late 20s, 30s, if you've ever heard of it, there's a psychotherapist, or I think he's a hypnotherapist, Alan Carr, and he had a book on stopping smoking, the easy way to stop smoking. And I was like, yeah, I've tried everything else. Hypnotism is the only thing that'll work. But I bought the CD, the DVD, it didn't work, so I decided to read the book. And no joke, I had a day off, and I sat down and I read this book in 7 hours. After that 7-hour period, I put out my last cigarette, threw the rest of the packet in the bin, threw all my lighters in the bin, threw all the ashtrays in the bin, took it out. I lived in a flat, took it out to the bins, and I did not smoke again for 6.5 years. Unfortunately, I came out of a relationship. In spite of myself, I was out drinking one night, and I was like, I want a cigarette, I can be who I want to be, shot myself in the foot, and I ended up smoking for another year, maybe a year and a half. Realised, and I don't know what it was about this book, but it just resonated so much with what addiction is, what smoking is, and it really helped me understand myself, understand the feelings I was going through, understand why cigarettes were so important to me. I mean, if any smokers might feel this, or addiction, like somebody going through addiction might get this, but when I got down to the last 6 cigarettes in the packet, I had to make sure. I knew those 6 cigarettes were going to last me about 2 hours, 2.5 hours. I had to find a window in that time, unless I was at work, then I knew I could get a packet straight after work or whatever. But I knew I had to get another packet or two within the next few hours. And it's all I could think about for a few hours until I managed to do it. And I went through that for years, but because it was so natural for me to think about that, and my whole life was being controlled by cigarette. I need a cigarette. I need to light a cigarette. When's a break? I need to get a cigarette. I'm at a theatre. When are we getting out of here so I can have a cigarette? I can't have a cigarette for another 3 hours on the plane. I need to have 2 cigarettes just before I get... When I think about it now, insanity. I cannot comprehend why I allowed that to happen for so many years. And a year and a half went by, and I realised that, I mean, at the time, just to give you a bit of context, at the time I was at the gym. I was doing an hour 6 times a week, home workouts. I'd go to the gym every now and again, and I was at my peak fitness when I started smoking again. In over a year and a half, my cardio levels went. I couldn't do the exercises or the classes that I was doing before in the same way. I really struggled to get through, and I'd gone back up to 25 cigarettes a day in a year and a half, and I just knew what was happening. So I pulled that book out. I went hunting for it in my boxes, and I pulled that book out, waited for a day off, and I knew how that day was going to end. I made the decision I was not going to finish that day as a smoker, and I have not smoked since. And it's now been, what we're looking at? We're looking at about 11, almost 12 years I've not smoked. Like, not even one, because I made that mistake once. I made that mistake on a night out, and I ended up being a smoker for a year and a half. Addiction, especially for those of you who are listening, and you're like, I just don't understand how are people addicted? Everyone has an addiction of some sort. And that's not to say you've got an addictive personality, but some of us are addicted to endorphins and we go extreme sports. Some of us are addicted to our kids and just want to spend all the time. Like, some of us have substance addiction. I would like to meet someone who can say, I've not got an addiction. Because I will ask you, or I'll ask them, okay, don't do it for a year. Then see how you get on. Don't do it for 1 year and see how you get on. Tell me it's not an addiction then. It's all got very serious, hasn't it? So, one thing that I would say for addiction is it's important, like I mentioned the gym, it's important for us to find other means of enjoyment. I know for me, and I talked an awful lot about myself in this podcast, in this episode, but it's my podcast, I can do that, that's fine. So I find other ways to get those endorphins naturally. I still go to the gym 4 or 5 times a week. I'm nearly 18 years down the line of training and working out now. So I've always enjoyed that, and I knew I would enjoy that. I knew that's what keeps me energetic. So I've stuck with that. I enjoy things like podcasts. It takes up some time. I'm from a performance background anyway, so anything that gets me talking or scripting or writing of some sort or performing, like, it takes me out of those bubbles of life that piss us off, like bad days at work, problems with family, just walking. Like, I'll tell you a story about my dog, right? You might have seen pictures of him on social media. He's a bull mastiff. He's got temper issues, and sometimes when we go for our walks, I come back in the worst mood ever because he knows how to upset me. He barks, he pulls. Like, at one point, he dragged me down the street on my arse for about 100 meters, and I couldn't control him. It was icy. That's how he got me that far, or maybe I exaggerated a little bit. But he did pull me up the street, and sometimes I come back in a really shit mood. And even now, I think, oh my God, I'd love a cigarette. I don't do it. I know I love smoking. I still know how much I love smoking, but I don't do it because I know how that ends. I have people very close to me who have died because of smoking. And it's really important. Here we go, serious again. But if you can look around you, just take a moment, go and put the kettle on or pour yourself a drink. As long as it's not an addiction kind of drink. Sit down for 10 minutes and just think about all those people around you who have lost their life. And for me, I'm glad I know in my head that I'm more likely to get another 20 to 30 years of life now that I don't do that anymore. Unless, of course, I get into an accident. Those are uncontrollable. But why would we not go through life controlling what we do? It is self-control, it is discipline, and it is commitment. And I think that's the difficult thing. Sometimes the addiction is the easy way out because you know how to do it. It's taking time to control your life. So if that helps, take that time, sit down and really process what other people in your life around you have gone through, whether it's cancer, whether it's that ending up in hospital, near-death experiences from addiction, or all those things. Hopefully they will resonate with you and help you to support people you know or to help support yourself. Because there isn't always a support network. And some people listening just now, whether you're in the car, whether you're at home, whether you're having a run, you may need this. So really take some time for yourself. Really sit down and really process what you need to do to get that life extension. So it doesn't come naturally. We do take it for granted. Let's really do this together. And by all means, if you think you'd like to discuss this further, drop me a message, reach out on social media. I'd love to get into a good, gritty conversation about this with any of you. So as we wrap up, folks, if you or someone that you know is struggling with addiction, remember that help is available. Try and reach out to local treatment centres or use helplines, support groups for guidance and assistance to help yourself and others, like we mentioned, on the path to recovery and support. Thank you all for tuning into MAMWAA, our podcast today. We do hope that you found this discussion on addiction both inspiring, insightful, and do remember to be kind to each other, be supportive, and really try to see the positive impact that you can have with other people as well. Please share and subscribe to the podcast. And like I said, you can keep the conversation going over on the Facebook page at Gordy Camp TV on Facebook and on Instagram and Threads at Gordy Camp. Until next time, take care of yourself and others, and we will see you soon. Bye.